Welcome back to the Purple Political Breakdown. How's it going? How's your day been? We're back at it again. Welcome back to the podcast. Hope you guys are enjoying your day, of course. Today, I have a very interesting conversation that I want to have with a great guest and discussing potential solutions for educational reforms, the role of nonprofit organizations, and it should be a very interesting one because if you guys don't know, I kind of elicited my most intriguing things that I talk about or care about in the political landscape. I know there's a lot of fluff going on every which where, but education, the public education system is definitely one of them. So I'm very interested to do this. In order to have this conversation, a great guest. His name is Ulric. Shannon.
Yes.
All right. I'm gonna allow him to introduce himself, tell him what he's about. In the midst of introducing yourself, I do want you to answer three questions. Obviously, who you are, where you're about, where they can find you, all that good stuff. Also, answer what your political ideology is, your general feels about the political landscape. I like people to kind of know where their perspective is coming from. I know that can be toxifying for certain people, but I do think it can shed a kind of nuanced highlight on identity is only so much behind the solutions that they perpetuate. And then another thing that so everybody can realize that you're a human being as well. Just indicate a hobby of yours, something that most people like that definitely makes you kind of relatable. So answer all three. Feel free. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Randall. My name is Ulric Shannon. I'm currently the executive director of the Search Institute Chicago. I'm also a proud alum of the fellowship. So I think that speaks volumes around how we see and believe in our people. So I graduated in 2020 and now currently serving as the executive director. I'll start a little bit about background, and I'll go into some of your questions that you had. But I always like to say, like, I'm the son of Bertha and Tyrone Shannon. My dad is from Tunica, Mississippi. My mother's from the city of Chicago, and so I am that line through the Great Migration. I'm a first generation college graduate, and I also say first generation college professional. I'll say I started my career as a third grade teacher on the far south side of Chicago. Thank you, recession. Where I thought I was going to law school and become the president of the United States one day, but the world had other plans for me. And so I taught third grade all boys on the far south side of Chicago and truly loved it and shaped everything that I do now. I really saw the brilliance in our students. And I also saw myself and my students as a product of Chicago Public Schools and public education. I saw that they were going through the same system and structure that I had many, many years before them. But I knew that if I can do it, I knew they could do more than I could. So it set a fire in me. I know you asked about my political ideology. It's funny because I'm a political science major, got a master of political science, and I like to say my political ideology really is just steeped in people. I like to hear all parts, all positions, all possibilities, and I think when we get too much caught up in the ideology or the game of politics is where we kind of veer from what's most important, or the people that we actually serve. And so I'm one of those folks who love to just be in community with people, learning from people, hearing about their own experiences, because I think that's how people kind of shape the decisions that they would want for themselves and for their families. A hobby, wow, maybe I don't know, maybe not a lot of people can relate to this one, but I've recently picked up running again. I ran in high school when I was young. I ran a lot in college, and a few years ago, I took a little break, fell in love with eating, and slowed down on the running. But preparing for the Chicago Marathon in October, I picked up a lot more running, which I found to be very healing, relaxing, and force personal time, which is, so if you can't get out there and run, I say start off with a walk, doing something. It's just a breath of fresh air for the day for me. So yeah, it's a lot and a little about me.
All right, excellent. Definitely one of the very few human beings that I've ever heard say that they like running. This is definitely not something I enjoy by any means. I find running very boring, but it is a very healthy habit. So I'm not mad
Yes.
at it by any means. Very healthy habit. So to kind of dive into this conversation, I guess what I really like to do to kind of help the audience understand what we're talking about is to define a few things. So the first thing is, what is a nonprofit organization?
Yeah, I feel like that's a very, very broad, but a nonprofit, the way that I look at them is kind of the gap between systems and organizations and people. And so we know much larger organizations may move at a little bit of a slower pace due to bureaucracy. Nonprofit organizations are entities that are there to serve people. We don't oftentimes maybe have a product line which we create revenue generating sources, but our revenue generators are outcomes of the betterment of people. So we sit between that gap of policy, people, procedure, and large systems to fill the gaps and the voids that people need more urgently. And we fill those gaps for them. So,
All right, excellent. And when you go about trying to establish like educational reform, what is that process? So help us understand how they do that. And then I'm going to take a step back, kind of go in reverse. I like to do things very, very chaotically somewhat. And
okay.
then I want to talk about the specific nonprofit organizations that you think are beneficial to educational reform. So talk us about the general process a nonprofit would have to do to establish some type of educational reform. What would they do? How would they get the word out? All that stuff.
Well, one, most organizations are started with a founder or who has a deep passion, and most of the time a very lived experience related to a gap that they see in the space. And there's a lot that we do here at the Search Institute, and we often call that freedom dreaming. So I think the first part of a nonprofit is centered in a core passion and a great dream of what could be better in the world. And they'll establish a board. You'll fill out a bunch of forms to make sure you're situated with the federal government. And once you have your board, which is typically yourself, you have to have a chair, a secretary, I believe, at minimum. And then you got to figure out the way to generate revenue. Often that's through philanthropy. That could be from donors who have deep pockets, or those who may not even have deep pockets who contribute to your vision and your mission of your organization. And once you establish your board, you kind of get your work started and going with partners or organizations or people that you're serving. And you hope and you pray that you can last beyond the typical 3 years that a nonprofit may exist. And happy to say that an organization like the Search Institute, which started with the dream of our founder in a little red moleskin, and now we're 10 years in, 11 years, 11 cohorts with over almost 400 alums across this country. So we teach people at Surge every day how to kind of launch those dreams, whether it's a nonprofit, for profit, in order to kind of, see the transformation we want to see in the world. So a lot of process. I'm not a lawyer, but I do encourage folks, if you're looking to start a nonprofit organization, get in contact with a lawyer who can help you navigate this process appropriately.
All right, excellent. And how do those organizations, once they establish who they are, get their message out in terms of their identity and what they're advocating for, get the donor money? What is step two? What do you do to start either advocating for educational reform or trying to put pen to paper and establishing educational reform? What does that look like?
Wow. For me, which launched a nonprofit education consulting company a few years ago, it was really about getting out there and learning people, talking to people, receiving feedback. I mean, we could jump right into implementation once you have those kind of foundational things kind of situated. You can run and talk to well, maybe you can't run to them. Sometimes they're hard to get to, but some of our funders out here. But you want to go talk to the people who are most proximate to the problem in which you are trying to solve. I think this small, when we think about liberatory design, that is kind of a first step in this non-linear process. But talking to young people, talking to families, talking to students, like figuring out what is the real root issue or problem that you're trying to solve and assist with, and then be able to take those findings back out into the world to be able to implement through a potential, maybe it's a, maybe your first partner is free. It's like, I just want to test this out. I want to run this program with young people. And there's clearly going to be some red tape when it comes to districts, which are rightfully so, to protect children, to make sure that they're safe. But yeah, I started my company with a pilot with 3 schools in the city of Chicago, principals who knew about my work, knew about me, and were willing to give me a chance to get a proof point out in the world. And I think once you have some type of proof point, it's a lot easier than to go to large philanthropic organizations or potential donors and say, this is what I know to be true, and I'm looking to scale that with your help and assistance.
So I'm going to ask 2 questions that I do think can be answered in one answer. but then there will be two branching conversations that can derive from it. So the first question is, what problems are you seeing that need reform? Obviously, people who've listened to my podcast for as long as they've done, they heard a lot of criticism I have with the public education system. Um, so I'm curious on what problems that not only you see, but then the second part of the question, and how are you trying to solve it? What organizations that either you're a part of or you advocate for that are trying to solve these issues? So, like I said, two-part question, but yeah, feel free to answer.
Current problem and how are we solving them? There's a lot of challenges and problems in public education, and I don't know how that's going to go away too fast. I always think about the relationships in the education ecosystem. For example, you have a school district who may be focused on innovation and like how do we make school better, more engaging for students who want to come every day and learn and enjoy that learning space. And then you may have a larger system above them that wants structure and routinization, and those kind of conflict. So sometimes we have unintended adversaries in this work because just systems and structures of those being are very hard to change. But when I talk to young people, when I talk to the adults who are in this work, there is a growing disconnect between our kids, how our kids are, and who's leading their schools. So diversity matters in the education system. We know nationwide over 53% of public school students are kids of color, but 78% of those principals are white. There's a mismatch on that matter. In Chicago specifically, we have 21% of our teachers are identify as Black, and about I think it's 41% if we consider Hispanic or Latina and Black together, while 82% of the district is made up of Black and brown students. So even in a large system or a large space like Chicago Public Schools, who doing a lot of work to diversify the teacher and leader pipeline, we still have an issue there. And our kids need to see themselves reflected in the leadership, both classroom leadership and school leadership and even beyond, because it impacts how they learn, it's how they dream, and it's actually going to show how they show up in the world. And so Surge is certainly countering that. We're making a difference, right? I talked about this being a national nonprofit organization that identifies, develops, and elevate leaders of color in education and adjacent sectors. So we talk about like youth serving roles, not just in the classroom or a district office. So we focus on their purpose, their power, and their community, not just professional development. This program as an alum is truly transformational, not transactional. Our fellows leave with clarity, healing, and I'll say the tools to go back into the world to lead boldly. And so we know there's not going to be one system, one person, or one structure that's going to solve all of the problems that maybe that I shared with you prior. And those are not even some of the academic challenges, right? Like we talk about, like, I mean, one of the things that's probably chewing at me right now is just like our literacy rates in this country are just scary for me. But we know that through folks like Surge alums, Surge fellows, they take this little brick back into their communities around our city, around our country, and we're building something that's going to be that is already proven to make some changes and impacts on young people and communities. But we're only 10 years in, and we know that the outcomes that we see from educators, you may not see those for 20, 25 years or within a lifetime. So Surge is taking the issue of the lack of diversity within our education systems, especially in decision-making rooms or decision-making tables, and putting people who have the audacity and the courage and the network and the proximity to the problem to actually enact some type of change. And knowing that the road to hell is often paved with good intentions, that they always have to go back and check in with their people and make sure that the impact is actually leading to the outcome that they would want, and not just implementing something in the world to say it's the greatest thing ever, even if it leads to some unintended consequences.
I think that's very interesting. It's definitely not something that I guess it's in branch, because when I have conversations, I do think about the value of teachers it's somewhat underappreciated, and it's definitely not seen as a job that is highly coveted in America right now. Nobody really wants to be a teacher. There's always a conversation on, some teachers barely get the compensation that I believe they deserve. I always break it down in when it comes to this conversation that these are the people that's going to mold the next generation. It's one of the most important things that you can do in American society. These people are going to make the next generation and determine what's going to happen. So you want to make sure they're as educated, as informed, as mature as possible. So that's why educators are so important.
Yes.
So I do value this idea, and you're focusing on a more niche version of it, focusing on the value of representation and diversity, which is very interesting and I do think important as well. When it comes down to it, I'm curious. Seems like there's two things that you're really focusing on. Let me know if I'm correct. Trying to create more of these teachers slash mentors slash leaders in these diverse spaces, and then also mentoring these kids that need that help, that would benefit from this help as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, and certainly I think the latter, it's maybe a not direct thing that we particularly do, because we know the fellows and alums are sitting in different spaces. So we have people who are superintendents who are in our current fellowship. We have people who are lawyers. We have classroom teachers. We have people who launch their own nonprofits. And so they're most proximate to their communities and understand the issues of their young people. We create the space for them to freedom dream around what is it that you actually want to put out into the world to then impact young people. So we have over 3 million young people that we are impacting through our fellows and alums across this country. So we don't necessarily bring children into our particular space of learning for the adults, but we create the space for our adults to really think about the impact that they want to have and how to measure that and how to bring those things to life.
Okay, so it's definitely more focused on creating these leaders who can then make an impact. Which, okay, fair enough.
And,
But
and
that
I'll and I'll say the reason that is the case is because most of our people who are Black and brown in our program are products of these systems, and understand that they too, like you said, they can take their genius to bring us anywhere else. They can go to the tech space. The ed tech space is blowing up, but there is some calling that is keeping them there, and we want to make sure, like Surge is that space that gives them that network and that drive to stay in this work every single day, where they can take their genius and bring it somewhere else, because they're needed. And we're losing in this in the diversity of education pretty fast because of other booming industries.
Okay, all right. I definitely like the approach here. I do think this is a very interesting solution to focus on by creating the leaders of the next generation, as well as creating a specific type of leader that can represent a minority of the population, but that is also very valuable in society. So, to kind of touch upon the last thing you said, and then I want to reroute into the idea of how do you find these leaders and how do you create these leaders. You mentioned the influence of new sectors of the like career space. Well, what are you referring to specifically?
Man, if you go to any big conference in this country, you could see all the salesmen of every ed tech company around. I mean, I think the big market maybe within education was curriculum selling curriculum for districts around the country. I don't know if I know any broke or poor curriculum designing company out there, but now the big boom is ed tech, and so we think about the proliferation around that during COVID, where folks were now forced to leverage technology a lot more. I can't tell you how many schools I've been into where they had smart boards that were not being used at all, just because people are not fully trained on how to use them or not feel comfortable or confident. But COVID forced people to become a little bit more engaged in technology, and I think it's a great thing, as long as we're implementing it properly and thoughtfully. But that is a huge market right now that I can see a lot of folks that I've worked with who are incredibly smart people with multiple degrees in multiple different areas, who could easily switch over to that space, whether it's sales, recruitment, or even just the design and creation. I've even recently gone through an AI accelerator with the national nonprofit organization to help educators learn how to create some of their own AI bots and technology that they can leverage within their organizations and or their classrooms and create them themselves. And so it is something that is booming, that may start to pull in people from the classrooms. But I think it's to your point earlier. I think if we can pay folks better, this is always going to be mine. I do believe that we can certainly pay teachers and educators a lot more that I think will keep them in the classroom because they understand, at least I did in the classroom. I understood when all of my friends who worked in corporate America, who had to work every holiday, it felt like it worked late nights, it worked at expense reports. I was off at 3. I can do my lesson plan. I can find time to build relationships with students and families. I can go running. Not saying that this is always the case because I think teaching is an extremely difficult job, but but I will say, like getting up at 3 o'clock, having my full summers, every holiday, winter break, were certainly some benefits that I do love and often sometimes miss, but with not being in the classroom right now.
So I just want to kind of be clear so everybody can understand why exactly does this competition exist? Because you would assume from outside looking in that everybody is trying to reach the same goal of bettering education. And in your situation where you're trying to create better leaders that are representative, of course, and then this other situation where they're just trying to pitch a different type of curricular plan or technology that can help make a curricular plan more efficient. Why would there be competing interests there?
Money. And I cannot say that I believe that everyone has the best intentions for children when they work in the education space. This is my honesty, my observation, my experience. So I do not assume that about every single adult who walks in a school, in a building, and is in front of kids every single day. I think it takes a lot to build relationships and trust with young people. And I think young people are even more thankful for you when they can see what you have poured into them actually showing out into the world. We all have those teachers that maybe they were a little tough, but it was steeped in love. And now I can see the outcomes of their work much later in my life. Why I'm a better writer, why I'm a better speaker, all those things. And so I don't necessarily believe that every adult is there, but I do believe that folks are, we go to work because we were taught and told as a young person, you could be anything you want to be in the world. And we often wanted a great job, to have lots of money, to be able to take care of our families. And so when people can see maybe what they've learned in education, being able to be pulled over to the ed tech space or any other kind of industry, I think people want to feel comfortable and feel safe that they will have the funds to be able to take care of themselves and their families, and especially in an economy like we have today. No teacher should be worried about the price of eggs or the cost of them, but they have to think about that a lot more than some of their peers in other industries. And so I think that's always going to create some competition because it's a part of the fabric of our country. And we continue to pour into capitalism, creating competition, and nobody wants to not be able to afford a lifestyle that is comfortable, being able to pay their bills. It's just one thing out of their mind that they don't have to stress about. And yeah, one day we'll get there, maybe.
All right, fair enough. All right, so how does Surge create these better leaders? How do they find them? How do they create them? What do you guys do?
Wow, that's a really good question. The Search Institute, we are very intentional about seeking out organizations who are values aligned to our organization, who have leaders who they can see and deeply believe in. So when we think about the fellows that we would want in our program, which we share with them, we want somebody who has at least 5 to 6 years in education experience, and that can be adjacent in a youth servant role, not just a classroom teacher. We also want somebody who's on a trajectory to step into those kind of decision-making rooms. And so that can range from a 24-year-old who a leader is just seeing and saying like, man, they've done 5 years or whatever. I think they have a great possibility of potential in this work. We want to keep them here. we will recommend and nominate them, or it may be a superintendent who's like, I actually need a broader network of Black and brown folks that I can talk to and learn from and learn with. And so through our program, there's a number of different things that we do. So there is an interview process, and then we notify the public of those who have been selected, but it is a 10-month journey that our fellows go on from October to July, that brings these leaders and communities together each month to explore their identities, equity, system change, and even their own story. So this is really about, it's a leadership lab, but also a part healing space. And so the impact is real for our fellows. So when we think about the outcomes and impacts that they want, so they get executive coaching for a full year through our program. They receive an opportunity to work on their capstone project that we call a freedom dream. And then they have a lifelong network of support, mentorship, and long-term growth. It really doesn't end when the program ends. We have a very robust alumni program. And then just think about some of our fellows and alums. 80% of our fellows have advanced in their careers, received promotions, or extended roles of responsibilities. And over 70 of our alums have started initiatives during or after their programs that are currently impacting their communities positively. So there are Black and brown folks. There is no age limit. We are flexible even on the degree expectation, because we know people are still having great impacts in their communities, and young people without a degree. It's really about giving them that access to relationships, networks, and learning spaces and unlearning spaces to no longer survive, but really thrive in their work and enjoy it every single day.
So you brought up, and I'm glad you brought up one of the recent things you just said. There's no age limit and you're flexible with the degree. Because I was going to ask the question, if you have an organization that is intended to create leaders that help society, wouldn't having a 5 to 6 year education requirement be kind of counterproductive in molding a new leader?
I don't necessarily think so. I think people need a little bit of test in the water in the space to know the depth of the conversation that we'll engage in. And so I think that they need some time in the classroom. They need some time in a space, deeply thinking about the impacts that we want for young people, so that when they come to a space like ours, they are a little bit more receptive of some of the unlearning that's necessary, self-accountability of like what have they poured into this space as well through their organization or themselves, and then be able to implement something a little bit different. And so there needs to be some type of baseline for the folks who enter in the space, because we will dive into things like negotiations and finance, but we'll also do a lot of internal work too. Thinking about your own identities, how did that show up in the space? And so if you've had very limited amount of time and experience, I think it may be a little bit of a challenge for you to get the most out of this experience. And so we're currently thinking of other innovative ways to keep those younger interested parties in our fellowship pipeline, because it may not just be for you just yet, but it will be one day. So we've had folks as young as maybe like 24, and I think our oldest is maybe like 64.
Yeah, because how I imagine it, and I do think what you're saying is very reasonable. There are often times that when people go into a new field, they have to kind of learn the ropes and get the foundation of understanding it. And too much things all at once can be very either one time consuming, but also very stressful on the individual to ensure that they're doing a proper job, or at the very least taking advantage of the resources and tools that they acquire. That definitely exists. I would say that's probably going to be a majority of people, but there's also obviously there's the minority that's like, no, I can handle both. I just really appreciate these resources. So have you guys thought about the idea of like some type of, what do you call it? It's like shadowing. It's like kind of like a mentor shadowing thing where someone with experience can overlook someone with not as much experience and help them here and there. And when they're ready, they can kind of join. That way, because how I'm kind of envision it, there's a lot of people that are very fresh into or the educational field. They go like, yeah, these kids suck. I'm barely getting paid. I have no help. I give up. So you want to make sure though you grab those people before they become completely nihilistic.
Yeah, I think we do that directly and indirectly. So directly, one of the programs I just talked about is a kind of a pre-surge experience. So there may be folks who may not have the full time worth of experience, but they'll get an opportunity to engage with executive coaches that we have, maybe a smaller group of people over a shorter amount of time, that will replicate or mirror kind of what we do in the general fellowship, but also indirectly. With over 200, almost 250 alums across the city of Chicago, one, I can tell you, there's no education space or room that I can go into where there's not a Surge alum. Like, there's not a meeting, there's not a room, there's not a space where a Surge alum is not present. And that they then turn in indirectly through us to mentor to younger Black and brown folks in the space, because now they're operating differently. They're reaching down to help them and train them and support them. And they are the ones who actually encourage them to say, like, now I think it's the time for you to apply. So our alums and fellows are the ones who nominate, also our supervisor partners from organizations that send their staff members, or maybe they have been a participant in Surge or a fellow or an alum. And so they are reaching back down to say, like, I see the thing in you that the doubt maybe that I saw myself before I had Surge. And I know that there's something special in you. So they're bringing them actually to Surge. And so we have seen multiple levels within organizations go through Surge. And I'll say most recently, yesterday I had a conversation with my board chair, who's also a Surge alum. Her daughter, who is who's currently in college at the University of Illinois, asked her mom, when she gets done with school, if she decides to go in education, can she apply for Surge? And so now we're going to get to the level of generational fellows within our organization. So indirectly and informally, I'll say, our alums are going back into the world with that. So when a part of that purpose is to reach out and ensure that other young folks stay in this work and have a space like Surge, whether it's in their internal organizations or they're sending them to Surge for a more in-depth experience that we provide, because that's what we do full-time, which you can't always do necessarily in the school building or district.
Yeah, I do appreciate that you guys have those alums that are kind of making sure that they're keeping tabs. Seems like you guys are working on some potential ideas as well, which is always, I'm always for continuous innovation to make things a little much more efficient and just better in general, of course. And ultimately, I like it because we've talked about it in this podcast. I'm just going to regurgitate something I already said. The value of teachers is at a low right now. And a lot of these people who are already not probably looked at, oh, you're a teacher. Like, it's not a high profile job. You're already not getting all the benefits that we've been talking about. And then going into it, like, am I here by myself? Do I have a space of peers that I can kind of rely on? So ensuring this kind of sanctity of teaching and that youth that is getting into this for the very first time, I do think is very valuable.
Yes.
With that said, so ultimately, it seems like the idea is molding a generation, or not a generation, molding leaders in general that can diversify or provide more representation and more diversity in these educational spaces. Is this is it just training and molding these leaders to be more capable in these spaces, or is there a next step that is purposeful in trying to create more diversity and representation in education?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with your second question. This is not about optics for us at Surge. It's truly about outcomes. It is truly about outcomes that we want to see the betterment for our young people, for our communities, and the broader space across this country. We are just taking the lens of educators who can have, I think, a much deeper and longer impact, because we're starting with young people. We're pouring into them directly. But one, I just want to make it clear, like, we are following the research, right? Like, it is important for proximity theory and practice. And so the theoretical piece around research, we know that young people just do better in school when there's at least one person of the same race that they have as a teacher. They're more likely to graduate. They're more likely to go to college. They're more likely to to feel like they actually belong in the educational space. I went to a PWI. I went to an amazing high school in the city of Chicago. I went to a Big Ten where in a political science space, I'll be one of very few Black folks in that space. And they never talked about the things in Chicago, on the west side of Chicago politically. I did not feel like I belonged. And we want our young people to feel like no matter what room they go into, they belong there. You earned it. You're supposed to be there. Take up space. Our teachers and our leaders have to model that for them. And so we are monitoring those outcomes all the time for our people. And it's also the belief that all students, diverse environments strengthen their critical thinking. It reduces biases because we're trying to change it for the long haul. And we want to prepare young people to thrive in a diverse world. As a Black man, I thought I was a unicorn, Randall. I was like, yes, I got 3 master's degrees all before the age of 27. Like, I'm about to take over the world. And I have to come back into the world like, no. Like, I see myself as a Black unicorn, and they do not. And the world is not going to always receive us so well, no matter how many degrees or education or schools that you went to, we're still being judged. And I think I show up differently because of my surge experience. I don't even think about those things anymore. Like that's a them problem, not a me problem. And I'm not going to own that or take that on to create some kind of self-doubt around myself because I know my intentions are pure. I want the betterment for people in this world. And I'm going to work extremely hard all the time to make sure that happens. And that also requires me to show up as my authentic self in all spaces so that the people around me can feel comfortable to do the exact same thing. And so, again, this is not about optics. This is about outcomes, a betterment for the world. We are trying to change systems that we know do not serve us well. And we do not have to wait on Capitol Hill or your local municipal government to do that. I truly believe the power is within the people. And then that's how you force policy and practice. It's through us and our power.
I really like it. I have 2 more questions, and then we can start wrapping things up. Because ultimately, I really like the idea of any way we can kind of create better teachers, and this more niche way is also extremely valuable. So I definitely advocate for what you guys are doing right here, of course. But kind of taking not a step back, but looking at a bigger picture, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of politics when it comes down to stuff like this, and we're becoming unironically a more political world with how kind of social media and media has kind of transformed people's perception of different political issues. When it comes down to one issue, I'm curious to how I'm going to ask 2 political issues, and I'm curious to see how you engage with these in consideration with the field that you're in right now and what you're doing. First is in regards to the perception, and you kind of talked about it, of how do you engage with certain people that are endowed with this idea that this is not for Black culture, that this is not something a Black person would do in America? As you talked about it, I mean, I face it, but I don't really mind. I was actually, even though I am Black, of course, I was born in Hawaii, so I was very easily integrated into engaging with different people seamlessly. But when I came to the States, one thing that I noticed is like there being like a very educated brown skinned person is not really normal in a lot of classes I'm there in. I'm very smart guys. Like a lot of the Black kids that are like me, that are my friends, they're not in my classes all the time. And I found that out when I came to the States, and it's like, oh yeah, this is normal. Like being an educated Black person who speaks properly is not normal. So in this situation, the space that you're trying to create, how do you engage with the people that think you're not acting Black, you're acting white?
That is a good question, but also funny to me, because I kind of ignore those spaces. Like I do not give them a whole lot of energy. I do believe that you can continue to pour to people with kind of that negative thinking about what they can and cannot do. It's almost like girls can't do that, but boys can. But I want them to remember the reality of the history of the United States. Black people did everything. We did everything. We created a bunch of the things, most of the things. But we can think about colonial, or we can think about colonialism, or we can think about Black people creating all the things, white folks have been able to say that they've owned it or created it through the system of the patent system, right? Like I could just steal the idea and say it was mine. And so I always have to continue to read, remind myself of the genius and the brilliance of my people through the most challenging experiences that I know I would have been terrible at surviving. I would have been horrible at it. And I'm just thankful that I'm born in this time to do my work and my push and push this movement during this period as opposed to that time, because I just couldn't imagine the horrors related to that, but also being in that horror, but still maintaining joy, maintaining community, designing, creating, outthinking. There is nothing that Black and brown people cannot do. But I will say to them, think about what we could do together. Like, if there's so much genius and power in this particular group that I can say in my own culture and my own people, and there's certainly some greatness and some smart things that white folks have done and are doing, and they can be great allies and great co-conspirators. But what if we took all of our collective genius and brilliance and see that in the real space of the betterment of all of our people as opposed to the separation of people? We could do some incredible things in this country, in this world, but there are forces that like to keep that separation, keep that distance, and the judgment on each other. When I think that love, Bell Hooks talks about love is the answer to all things, and I think a little bit more love in the world, as opposed to assuming what people can or cannot do. Just think about what we could do together.
Yeah, I definitely co-sign a lot of what you're saying. Sometimes it does take, stepping back from what your individual experience and really understanding American history and especially what Black people have been through. And it's definitely not even comparable to the current times in terms of what they had to go through it, constantly fight for their rights. And now we're reaching a place here in society today where a lot of Black people have a lot of rights. They are capable of doing a lot of different things. And like the vision of America, well, it should be the vision of America. We're kind of not doing that right now. The vision of America is having the opportunity to become who you want to become. And sometimes these people, it doesn't matter where you fall in terms of ideology or race or whatever, putting yourselves in these boxes is just not helpful for you, not helpful for the people that you're trying to represent at the same time. So I definitely advocate for that. But with that said, as I said, we've come a long way. We've done a lot for society. We've done all these different things. And now we're reaching a time where we're kind of looking like we're going in reverse. There's been a lot of things talked about in terms of us going to a greater period in American history. So, with that said, one of the big conversation topics that a lot of people talk about politics that I guarantee you probably are dealing with is people's hatred for DEI. They have turned this term into a slur. I have constantly fight back against people. I just recently had a MAGA supporter on, and I definitely told him that the way you look at DEI is completely flawed, in my opinion. So when it comes to people who lose this term DEI as a slur and look at your organizations like, what do you mean you're trying to put these people into these situations? Sounds like DEI to me. Sounds like they're getting stuff that I'm not getting. Why am I not getting this? How do you deal with those people? And how do you deal with the backlash of DEI, considering it's very much synonymous with what you're doing right now?
Again, another recent conversation. Cannot wait to the day that like DEI, any of the words that you choose, are not like leveraged as buzzwords anymore. It's just the baseline. I think that folks in their everyday life experience the outcomes of DEI related work, and don't even realize that they benefit from it. I've done some work in the past, which with pretty large contracts in large districts in the South, and we're simply told like, "Oh, just remove these words from this document." and what they have experienced are like parts and practices of DEI, and did not even realize it because it was all steeped in the benefit of their particular child. It was very selfish of them, which I'm all for. But they didn't even realize that they were going through that. And so for me, DEI is not necessarily like the words that I go to. It is or the goal for me is it's a compass for me in this work. And I just continue to stay grounded in people and not in politics. And I think if I think it's a distraction as well. Like if we could just pick a word and make it a bad thing or make it a good thing, like we're arguing the word, but not necessarily like the outcome or the practice of the thing. And so for me, and I think I can speak on behalf of my organization, it doesn't really matter for us what happens in DC. We ask, what do our leaders need? What do our kids deserve? And how can we build from there? And so right now, even in this, what feels like chaos, it's actually like lighting a fire in me. I know most folks may feel the tension and the stress and weigh heavy on them. And it does for me sometimes, but it also is like, this is what nonprofit organizations have been preparing for all the time. It's like when people are not really thinking about education reform or whatever, like it's a big topic now, but this is stuff that we've been fighting and protecting all the time. So like this is our time to do our big one, not to fray away, not to be shy, but to really double down on what we do and how we serve our people and how we show up. And so this is the time for us to step up and step out on faith and remember that our commitment is the long game. It is not a short game, and development leaders can sustain that change that we want to see no matter the landscape. And so this is just, a part of it. And so I think people should be a little bit fired up to do their very best work, intentional work, meaningful work, and make it sustainable, that the work that we do right now is going to last well beyond our years. But, our great grandkids, great grandkids will really be able to thrive in the education space and make a deep impact in the world and propel them even further than what we do today. So it's not about me. It's not about us today. But we got to stay focused on people, not on politics. It's never going to be right. This is their first time doing it too. So,
yeah, I appreciate that kind of standpoint. Actually, one more question. Do apologize.
Okay.
I appreciate that standpoint because ultimately your focus with the solutions that you're trying to advocate for, and a lot of this politics is, I agree, kind of nonsense at times. That's distracting from the real issues that we should be talking about. And that's why I'm like, we should really be focusing on different issues other than like the things that are non-existent. I'm the best way I could put it. These are not really issues. These are fake issues.
I mean, the Department of Education didn't last. It didn't exist at one point, and we had great outcomes for Black kids specifically. It wasn't really until Brown versus Board of Education when we started to do segregation, separation in schools, where we saw a deep impact on student learning. And that was simply because we lost over like 28,000 Black and Brown teachers and teacher leaders across this country. And so we are still feeling the impacts of, again, something with great intentions, but an outcome and our impact that we did not foresee. And I think we're still kind of climbing out of that to this day. And so it didn't exist at one point. I got my own feels and like appreciation for the Department of Education and what they can do and make it better. Or if they don't exist, it is like, okay, it's not within my decision-making authority, but what I can do is this in order to make sure that the people I'm closest to are going to be successful as a classroom teacher, leader, and even as a student. So it didn't even last that long anyway. It hasn't been here forever.
Fair enough. When it comes to that Department of Education stuff, I also think that people have misconceived notions on what they actually do. But with that said, I do, like I said, I do like that mindset, really focusing on bending down what you got to deal with. But the question regarding the DEI and dealing with Black cultures, I'm sure that there are definitely things that you address. Mm-hmm. And probably the biggest education issue, other than stuff regarding certain rights that we don't have to talk about right now, is the conversation of school choice. So in a situation when you're trying to create leaders, develop leaders, you have all these people in the educational space, when someone comes up to you and wants to really know your opinion about school choice. I am genuinely curious on how you deal with that question in particular because it's a politicized one that people are immediately going to have an opinion about you if you agree or disagree with them.
Yeah, I honestly cannot see a world in which people will come to me to ask the question about school choice or vouchers. We certainly have a lot of great people throughout our network of folks that they can certainly talk to, whether they're lawyers, we have people who are elected officials within Surge. And so with having a great network of people, I don't have to be the expert at everything or provide an opinion on. I can certainly send them to folks who are much more educated than I am in that space, who have maybe experienced it in their own right, whether it's within their current state or city that they live in. And so we provide them the space to like learn from the folks who do that or are talking about that, experiencing that, debating it, to have those conversations there because it can be like kind of a personal thing. And I think we're always kind of uncovering something new. I think at the core of us here at Surge is like, I personally, I've worked in charter, I've worked in public. At the end of the day, I just want every kid to be able to come out, have a great education, do well in school, feel like they can thrive and survive in the world because they can read, they can do math, they can do all the things that are necessary for adults. And some of the adults are still learning how to do those things, but I've seen kids come out of all situations to be extremely successful, and no matter what those learning conditions are, structural. And I think again, another distraction from what we would actually want for kids and focus on. Yeah, like if it's showing us that it's not having great outcomes for students, then don't do it. If it is showing great outcomes for young people, then I think it's a great option. So
All right, fair enough.
Kids first for me.
Outcome dependent, have a baseline that everybody can agree with. Kids first. That is a perfect way to deal with these kind of politicized questions. So I'm not upset about it. I was just curious to see how you would navigate it. With that said, that is all I got for today. Anything else you want to say? Plug anything else you got?
Now I would just say for those that are out there listening, do your big one. Don't wait for permission. Start building what's possible. And that's what keeps me going here at Surge. If you want to learn any more about the Surge Institute, please check out surgeinstitute.org, our website. There's plenty of information about all of our programs for Black principals to folks in Chicago, DC, Philly, Detroit. There's great opportunity for you to donate to our organization or nominate somebody to be a part of the Surge community. And so thank you so much, Randall, for your time today.
Yeah, no problem. With that said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's podcast episode. If you did enjoy it, feel free to rate it 5 stars, share with your friends, share with your families. Y'all have a good one. Take care and peace.